Welcome to today's podcast.
Welcome.
Where we are going to be trying a new gimmick.
A new gimmick.
Which is not necessarily a totally unique or original idea, but for us, it's new, and that is doing a movie draft.
Like all good podcasters, we just steal ideas from better, more successful podcasters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And today we are going to be drafting 80s action movies.
So excited.
We were talking about before we started here that we think 80s was the golden era of action movies. I think because of our ages, we were both pretty well raised on 80s action movies, and probably a lot of them are responsible for our love of movies. And so,
absolutely.
What we're going to do is we're both going to draft 5 movies. If you're anything like me, you made a list that's significantly longer than even 10, so we'll have movies that won't get taken that are worthy choices. We decided to just do a regular standard 1-to-1 back and forth draft.
Right.
I don't think we need a lot more preamble than that, other than to say we also decided we're going to be pretty liberal with the term action movie.
We are.
There's a couple movies we debated, and we said, you know what, let's just throw them in.
Throw them on there.
For fun, we'll include it. We have not decided the draft order. We're going to do that right now. Live with this quarter that I have, which, by the way, I'm super nervous about flipping and trying to catch because I'm bad at this action. But I will flip it. I will let you call it. What I'll try to do is do the old flip, catch, and smack down on my hand.
We're gonna see how cool you are. In an 80s action movie, the guy would be really cool when he did it.
He would.
And he would also probably have on like aviator sunglasses.
Toothpick in his mouth.
Yeah.
We're basically just describing Cobretti right now.
We are. And once you did it, you would have some cool like one-liner as you did it.
Yeah, exactly. All
okay.
Right, so we'll let you call it when I flip it.
Okay. Heads.
It's tails.
All right. I accept. The coin has spoken.
I desperately wanted to have a cool one-liner, but all I could think was, that's tails.
Listen, we just do our best on here. And those 80s guys were just a special breed. The one-liners just flowed out of them. They just...
Oh my gosh, they did. In order to be an 80s action star, you had to look buff and be able to say a one-liner.
I feel like that was the casting call where the director was like, all right, improv, 5 one-liners, go. And, either you made the cut or you didn't. Yeah. So...
All right, so I get the first pick.
You do.
Which is, it feels like a tremendous advantage to me because there's one pick that was right to the top of my draft board. Just felt like it belongs there. Mm-hmm. That's the 1988 classic.
You're going Die Hard.
Die Hard.
You're going Die Hard.
I've got to take John McClane and...
I respect the choice.
Possibly my favorite villain of all time, Hans Gruber.
Oh, yeah.
This is maybe the exception to what we just said about the typical 80s action star.
Yeah.
And in fact, obviously I was not around to really not old enough to really understand that Bruce Willis was a surprise casting for this choice. People did not see him as an action.
He was more like the everyman.
Yeah, and but this movie is just so smart.
It is
so perfect. It became the template for action movies for the next decade.
I would argue it's still to this day ripped off. People, even though they don't make the action movies like they used to, if they do make them, it's just Die Hard on a Die Hard on a boat, Die Hard on a train, Die Hard on a bus, Speed, all these movies. Oh, it's so influential.
Yeah. They even just keep making Die Hard movies, which
unfortunately
they should have stopped after just a few.
I would say the first 3.
I'd say the first 3 are fine. And honestly, I think I would have been more okay with the 4th one if it just wasn't a Die Hard movie. I think if it was just another generic Bruce Willis
action movie. That's a good point.
It just didn't need to be Die Hard. So my first pick is Die Hard.
I can't argue with that. That's an amazing first pick, and I'm jealous. You want me to go?
Your pick, yep.
Okay. So I always feel like I need to explain myself a little bit. This is how weird I am. As I was making this list, I almost wanted to apologize to the movies. Like, if I don't pick you first, don't think I don't love you. Like, I'm talking to my kids because I don't think I have a movie. I mean, obviously you're making a list of movies. I love every movie on my list. I think I'm going to go with Predator. Probably you always hear Predator that the manliest movie ever made in history. Predator rules. I rewatch it at least once a year, and I have since it came out basically. It's still awesome. And before the pause started, you and I were talking like, why don't they make movies like this anymore? Why don't they make movies like Predator? Just a simple but awesome idea executed perfectly. Predator is awesome. I wouldn't change a thing about it. I don't think it's dated. I mean, like at the beginning, the guys like get out of the helicopter and they look very 80s, but it's just such a cool idea. And Arnold is awesome. He's so good in the movie. Carl Weathers is awesome. Like, it's just, that movie rules. And the Predator is an amazing invention. Like, he looks cool, he has cool weapons, and he's got like the heat vision thing, which is still awesome and could be really dated, but it's not. It looks really cool still to this day.
Predator was number 2 on my board.
I figured it would be.
When you started, I was like, just don't take Predator. Let me get Predator.
I'm really
I'll
sorry.
be so happy, but it's the right choice.
It is the right choice.
It's a great choice. You're so right. It's got everything it needs because it's got just a great environment, that jungle.
The jungle.
It's got the action team. Each character just is unique.
Unique,
and kind
yeah.
of cool. The villain, that's really awesome. It kind of does the Jaws thing where you spend a lot of time like feeling the presence of the villain, but not seeing it, and it builds the tension and the pressure. And then of course it has the finale that's the guy has to win by kind of going primal and back, with the technology, and
that always works. Mm-hmm. That gimmick to me, like all my tools and my weapons are gone. Now I'm just going to use the jungle and make my own. That always works. Yeah. It's so good. I love that movie so much.
And you're right about. I feel like that was right around the turn of Arnold being a guy who just looks the action movie part to a guy who like is actually good in these action movies. Like,
yeah, he is.
He's actually, you don't laugh at him delivering the lines. Like he's just perfect in that movie.
Yeah, I would argue that Arnold is a good actor.
I would too. I think it took a little while to get there.
I do too.
He got there.
I'm not saying he's Marlon Brando, but for what he was required to, or what he needed to do in his movies, delivers 100% what you want him to deliver. I think he's a good actor, and Predator rules. That's my big hot take, is that Predator rules.
That is a great pick.
Yeah.
All right, man. Time for my second pick, and I feel like, man, anything I pick's gonna feel a little disappointing. This draft is gonna be fun, but it's gonna be a lot of, man, I hate that I didn't get that movie.
I know.
I took Die Hard though, so I can't complain.
Right.
That you got Predator. And my approach to this is, again, it doesn't really matter. We probably should just take the movies that we like best or we think are the best movies. But in my head, I just feel like I have to have certain representation. And because I'm like, I have to have Arnold. I've got a couple Arnold movies, but I'm already worried because you got Predator, which is the number 1 Arnold I wanted. I'm going to take Terminator. I'm going to take 84 as the Terminator, so I make sure I get that Arnold.
Yep. I'm jealous of that pick.
Which is just another classic movie that was very influential. Probably a little underrated at this point because of Terminator 2 being considered a little superior to it. But Terminator, I think what I always say people don't realize is what made that movie really work is that, yes, I probably shouldn't say this as we're taking an action movie draft, it's really almost more of like a suspense thriller than an action movie because the pacing, and it's just this cat and mouse thing, and it kind of builds this dread of like this unstoppable machine is chasing me.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the more modern attempts at Terminator get wrong, is they just go straight action. And they lose the like that deliberate pacing and suspense that really both the first two had.
Yeah.
But Arnold was so menacing as this robot that you just couldn't stop. I remember watching it as a little kid and just
I was scared of it when I was little, being
freaked out. And great effects for a movie that old when he becomes just the Terminator skeleton.
It's awesome.
It's incredible.
1984, and that looks. I mean, there are clearly spots where you can, but that to me, that adds to the movie. It doesn't when they're done well, even if they are dated because of how far we've advanced. It just gives the movie such a. I don't know. There's just something about that quality of, man, they had to do this when you couldn't just CGI everything. So even if the practical stuff looks dated, or it would obviously be much better now, it doesn't hurt movies like Terminator. It adds to them, in my opinion.
Yeah, and great. So many of these movies come down to like great finishes. I just think the finish in that factory and
It's-
the way she finishes it by hitting the button as it's already
awesome.
been blown in half by Kyle Reese and is crawling towards her, and it just can't reach her as it crushes it. It's
So cinematic and
just
so
perfect.
good.
Yeah.
There's like 4 or 5 just amazing sequences in that movie. Plus, you know, like I say this a lot in here, but I always try to like, if my kids and I watch a movie together, or if I show them a movie I love, I always try to explain to them like what it was like at the time. And I was 4 when Terminator came out, so I wasn't in the moment. But I got to watch that movie pretty young, and I was like, you know, so many of these movies, you have to understand, like, they set the template. You know, there wasn't movies like that before, and like they grew up, and there's 6 Terminator movies, and there's rip-offs and stuff, and like it was such a cool original idea. And it's James Cameron, who we would go on to find out he's a master. You know, whether you like all of his movies or don't,
Right.
the guy's incredible.
Yeah, he's always going to be doing something at least groundbreaking as
Yes.
far as the filmmaking process.
And it starts with Terminator, you know, which was his first, I think he directed like Piranha 2, which was like a low budget, like Roger Corman movie. But Terminator is his first like movie. Yeah. So that's incredible. And that movie, to me, it's like Predator. I watch Terminator quite a bit still to this day. It holds up perfect, I think. Yeah. And the 80s-ness of it doesn't hurt it at all, I don't think. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Your second pick.
We're coming out just guns blazing. Okay. My second pick. I'm not going for quality necessarily here. I'm going for my personal love, and I'm going Commando. This is the first time we've ever been at odds on the podcast.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and say Commando was on my list, and when I was sitting there like, I got to get an Arnold, I looked at Terminator and Commando. And I leaned Terminator, but I was like, Commando's so good too.
Okay, so here's the thing about Commando. It does something that movies don't do anymore. It's fun. It's ridiculous, it's bad, it's cheesy, it's all these things, but it's fun. And they don't make fun movies anymore, I don't feel like. I feel like so many movies anymore, they either take themselves way too seriously or, you know, like I've said this a lot on here, I'm going to say it again, I love Marvel, but, you know, especially now, where like Marvel movies, you always just feel like they're building for the next Marvel movie, and that can be a little distracting. Commando is just 90 minutes, I'm a Marine or whatever he is, they took my daughter, I'm coming to kill you all. And he does. And it rules. It's awesome. And it's another example of Arnold not necessarily being a good actor in that movie, because that's early Arnold, it's 85, but delivering exactly what you want him to deliver. You know, he looks awesome. He delivers these ridiculous lines, but he does it with this like earnestness. And plus he just looks, you know, he's Arnold. He looks awesome. Like, it's got some funny spots to it. It's got some great action. It's got some over-the-top 80s violence. Like, it's got the worst villain in movie history, Bennett. The villain, he doesn't have an ounce of muscle on him. And he wears, for no reason at all, he wears this chain, metal, like, you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I know exactly what you're
It's just the worst thing ever. I mean, he is the worst movie villain probably of all time. Yeah. And you get some one-liners. It's just awesome.
It is. I think if I had to show somebody a movie that just summed up what is 80s action, Commando is like the perfect encapsulation of what 80s action was. And you're right. Like, it's so simple. I don't really know what the motivation of the villains are, other than I know they kidnap his daughter, and so he's like, I've got to go get them.
They kidnap his daughter, and they want him to go like assassinate a president or something in a different. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It just doesn't matter.
But it's that classic, like, if I'm remembering correctly, when we first meet Arnold, is he carrying like basically a tree trunk?
He's carrying a tree
that's just gigantic. It's just like,
it's enormous. I mean, it's not a log. It's a tree.
But yeah,
and it's like he's carrying it like this, and there's like, of course, a close up of his muscles, and he is jacked. It's so fun. It's so funny. There's a scene where he's chasing a guy in a mall, and the guy's on one side of the mall and Arnold's on the other, and he just looks up and there's just this enormous balloon like hanging on the, and so he just grabs it and swings through the mall on this balloon. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I think he has a one-liner for like every villain that he kills.
He has so many one-liners.
And then here comes the one-liner to punch.
He has so many one-liners in that movie.
It's amazing.
Another real quick thing that's great about Commando, I always try to explain to like my kids, when they made these movies in the 80s, nobody knew like crystal clear HD TVs were on their way. So if you watch it now, like there's a scene at the end where he's like at the bad guy's like compound and he blows up all these buildings and the bad guys are supposed to be there in the explosion. Plain as day, they're just mannequins. I mean, plain as day. Or like when Arnold, there's one part in Commando where he has to jump out of a plane and they show this long shot of him, just plain as day. It's just a dummy just falling through the air. And it's so fun. It's amazing.
That's a great pick. All right. Ready for my third pick?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, my third pick. Like I said, there's certain representation that I'm like, I've just got to have on an 80s action pick. And so to make sure I get some of that representation, I'm going First Blood, 1982, Sylvester Stallone. Can't have an 80s action movie draft without a Stallone movie.
No, you can't. I've got a few on here.
And I went back and forth with this because there might be some others that are a little more fun, for sure. This is a little heavier.
It's like kind of weighty, and like it kind of takes itself seriously.
It does, but at the same time, it's just still a really good,
it is
intense action movie.
Yeah,
and of course introduced the Rambo character, which went on
became
to be
famous.
A little bit of a parody of itself, but in First Blood,
Stallone's got some real acting moments in that movie, and like Brian Dennehy's in it, and he's pretty good. Like you're right, it's a weighty kind of heavy. Like he's got PTSD basically is kind of the thing, and he's got like this weight of the war hanging over his head, and it's a really like interesting setup to the central controversy of the film because the conflict's really nothing. It's just this local cop who just thinks he's not a good element for the town, so he basically wants to run him off, and it just real simple
sort
premise
of sets off.
Yeah,
and it just is this escalating thing where neither character thinks they're in the wrong. Stallone's like, I'm just trying to live my life, and this cop's like, I'm just trying to keep this garbage out of my town, and he's escalating it, and it just gets out of hand, and that's the whole conflict of the movie.
And even though it has nothing, it's nothing like Predator, it has that whole thing of like guy in the woods just kind of makeshift like traps and stuff like that, and that's just always cool. But I think a lot of people would only think of Rambo like once it kind of became a parody of itself, which happened pretty quickly. Like they did Rambo 1. Rambo 2 is just a full-blown action movie, and then the other ones are just ridiculous. But it's a good movie, probably one of Stallone's more serious attempts at acting, I would say. Like outside of Rocky 1 and stuff like that. Like that movie's it's not like Commando at all, where Commando is kind of winking at you and knows it's silly. Yeah. It's a good choice. Okay. Getting to the point where I feel like I'm hurting other movies' feelings. So I agree with you. There are just certain things when you're talking about 80s action movies you have to have. You have to have some Stallone. So I'm going Cobra. Which is Cobra is so hard to explain. Cobra, the best way I can explain it is everything right and everything wrong with the 80s at the same time. It's the 80s ridiculousness and just no self-awareness of how ridiculous you're being, and it's also just the 80s like excess and like Stallone just being so greedy and so into himself that he wrote, and someone technically else directed Cobra, but I've always heard basically Stallone directed Cobra, and he wrote it, and he is so over the top in that movie. He's got the sunglasses. He's got a match in his mouth. He's got the skin tight shirt. He's got tight jeans. His gun has a cobra on it. He's got boots. He's got a fast car. Like, he gave himself every gimmick.
Don't you forget his cool machine gun with the laser.
I can't believe I didn't mention that. And the poster of Cobra is just him standing there with that machine gun with the laser, with his sunglasses on. Like, so Cobra's 86. So in 85, Stallone had Rambo 2 and Rocky 4, which were both monster hits. I think if I'm right, I think in '85, Back to the Future was the #1 movie of the year, and I think Rambo 2 and Rocky 4 were like 2 and 3, or like 2 and 4. He had 2 of like the top 4 highest grossing movies of the year. He was clearly super into himself. When you watch Cobra, and it comes off the screen, where he was just so convinced he was great and could do no wrong, and he so obviously had nobody around him to tell him otherwise. And it is just glorious.
Yeah.
The bad guys make no sense in that movie.
No.
You don't know who they are, why they do what they do. Brigitte Nielsen is in it. She's awful. She's a terrible actress. It's amazing and awful at the same time. But it deserves to be on this list.
It absolutely does. Yeah, and you can tell coming off the back of those 2 movies where he's playing like the sort of all-American hero. He was like, I want something a little edgier.
I want to be the bad boy.
Yeah. I can tell, man. I'm putting together a list that's probably a little more. I just feel like at every turn I'm going like a little more like celebrated by like the critics, and you're going more fun. And I'm like, Commando and Cobra are 2 of the most fun movies, and they were both on my list, and I debated between both of them for both the picks I made. It was like, yeah.
But it's like you said, too, like, you grow up on these movies.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, I remember watching Commando and Cobra, I didn't think they were ridiculous. It was like, these guys are awesome. And I would pretend like I was Commando and Cobra, and play in the backyard, and I had my toy guns, and it was awesome. And then, like we've talked about before, when you're little, you don't have any taste, and then you grow up and you're like, oh, these are terrible. But they just, and we've talked about this before, like why there's a difference between like a Cobra or a Commando and the movies that come out now that are just no fun. Yeah. You don't ever want to watch them again. The action movies, I mean.
Right.
Whereas I could go home right now and rewatch Commando and Cobra for the 200th time each and enjoy every second of it.
Yeah.
And I would also recommend anyone who's watching and has never seen Cobra, it's worth it just to see Stallone. He is mumbling so bad in that movie. You almost have to turn on the subtitles. Like, I think he thought, like, part of this cool, tough guy is he just talks real low. And there are literally parts of that movie where you're like, what? Like, you're leaning up closer to the TV because you cannot understand what Stallone is saying. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's yeah, and you can't even those 2 feel like you can group them together, Commando and Cobra. But like you said, Commando's kind of got this winky, like, we know, and Cobra's got this, like, we're totally oblivious.
I think Stallone maybe thought he was going to win an Oscar for Cobra.
Somehow they both still work. I don't know.
It's like I said, they're such a representation of mid-'80s action movies. And you cannot talk about them without having Stallone and Schwarzenegger represented.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to go... it's so tricky only having 2 picks left because there's so many movies I want to have on my
list. A lot of good stuff's going to be left on the floor for me.
I'm going to go ridiculous now.
Okay, good. You need to get more ridiculous.
I do need to get... And it's hard to get more ridiculous than this, but it feels appropriate to have 1988's Bloodsport.
Oh.
Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I thought maybe I don't want to ruin any other picks. I thought maybe you were going to say Over the Top.
That would have been another great pick. But I'm going Bloodsport.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, it's the best Van Damme.
Yeah.
And just the setup is perfect. Like, guy has to fight his way through a tournament of all these fighters, all these different style, unique fighters. Honestly, like, there's a little more to the movie than that. You never have to watch the rest of the movie. You can fast forward through any of the plot buildup. It doesn't matter.
It makes zero difference.
It's got, if you think Jean-Claude Van Damme is bad, it's got one of the worst child actor performances in history of cinema.
Yes.
Where I think maybe the kid was just trying to be like Jean-Claude, so it's terrible.
It's really bad.
It's so bad.
It's really bad.
But the action is so much fun. And I think as a kid, playing with my toys, I reenacted some form of the Kumite. Like, all my figures are going to have to fight each other through a tournament a million times. And it's just so much fun.
They just don't do it enough anymore where they're like I'm stealing this idea, but I've heard people say like the 2-sentence description for a movie. Mm-hmm. They don't do enough of that anymore. Like you said, guy has to fight in tournament. That's the movie.
Yep.
That's it. They just don't do enough of that.
Yeah. It's so funny to me because Van Damme, not a good actor.
No.
He's a little like Schwarzenegger in that he got a little better as time went on. He still wasn't ever great, but like in Bloodsport, he's still like purely not good.
He's not.
It's just he has the physical look and the ability to kick and jump and
Oh, yeah.
splits. And so you can tell this movie, nothing about it was built around him or his ability to act. It was just like,
It was
we want to
his
make a
physical-
cool fighting movie, and you have the physical tools. And I think maybe that's one thing that movies now just don't do. They don't ever just cast somebody and say, you just have the physical tools and the look, and we'll craft something cool around all that.
With Van Damme, it felt like someone just realized one day he could do the splits, and then they're like, okay, you're an actor now.
Yeah. Anytime they're like, we're not sure what to have him do in this scene. He can't really talk. Well, have him just sitting there doing the splits.
Have him do the splits.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's really all we need. No, Bloodsport is awesome. It really is. It's a great pick. I wondered if you would have any Van Damme on your list.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, are we to number 4?
We're on number 4.
Okay, I'm gonna go. You're right. This is getting hard because there's so many things I'm leaving on the table. But I do want to go a little more maybe prestige. I'm gonna go your route. I'm gonna go Aliens.
All right.
Which I think is an incredible movie. I think it is one of the all-time best sequels ever. It is so, and again, we might be blurring the lines here because it's definitely, sci-fi, suspense, almost kind of a horror movie. But I think it qualifies as action.
I think so.
I mean, the action scenes are so well done, and it's Cameron, his follow-up to Terminator, and he's just so good at this kind of stuff. He's just directing a movie about aliens coming after people, but he elevates it to such a high level. And Sigourney Weaver is incredible. Bill Paxton is amazing in that movie. Michael Biehn's in it from Terminator. It's got a good cast. It's got, again, like we were talking about when we talked about Predator, memorable characters. Even though some of these characters only exist in the movie to get captured and killed by aliens, they still do a great job. They feel like unique characters. And this has one of the all-time smartest gimmicks in a movie ever, I think, where they've got the little tracking thing and it beep, beep, and as the aliens get closer, it beep, beep. It's genius. And because you've got someone with the skill of Cameron, that is utilized to such great effect. And where, as Bloodsport, you were talking about had a terrible kid performance, Aliens has a really good kid performance on the little kid scale.
Yeah.
But she's got a couple of lines that are a little rough, but she does a good job. The little girl in the movie does a really good job.
Yeah, I had a feeling that Aliens was going to be a movie that you were going to pick, just because I know it's one of the most celebrated 80s action movies. I think I don't have a great relationship to it because I honestly to this day don't know if I've ever sat down and watched it start to finish.
Oh,
it's
wow.
one of those ones I saw in pieces, and because of that I probably never appreciated it as much as I should. I know it's good.
It is
There's
good.
iconic things I still think of. But I still love the story of, I don't even know if it's true or where I heard it, but James
You and I have
Cameron's
talked about this
pitch
before.
that he walked in and it was like Alien sequel, and he just walks up to the alien.
Put
and
an
adds
S?
on the end with a dollar sign
Yep.
through it. So
Well, it worked.
And everybody was like, I like this guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, simple idea. He's like, okay, we've seen an alien in the first one. Was more of a horror movie and it slowly
It's very
stalks,
slow. It's really
just
slow.
creeping. And then he's like, so this one we're going to pick up the pace and make it more action.
Yeah.
And have a lot more of it.
In Alien, thethere's one alien.
Yeah.
In Aliens, there's numerous aliens.
But Cameron always has a way of, sometimes it's not a subtle thing necessarily, but he always finds a way of having some sort of heart in the movie, and that having the kid character and Ripley sort of being this
so smart
maternal figure to her as she's going to protect this girl through this terrible environment really does help. So you've got your soldiers, your military guys that are there to fight and they're going to die, but you have to have someone that you really feel for. So you really feel for this girl that needs to survive, and it really is what brings the audience in.
It really is, and they do an incredible job in the confines of this sci-fi horror action movie of establishing that relationship. So at the end of the movie, the little kid gets taken by one of the aliens in one of the coolest shots in movie history, where she's standing about waist deep in water, and all of a sudden one of those aliens just comes up out of the water behind her. It's incredible. And they take her, so Sigourney Weaver's character, it's such a smart, like, the place they're on is going to explode. There's a timer, T-minus 20 minutes till everything explodes, which is a good movie gimmick. Mm-hmm. And she goes back to get the little girl. And you're not sitting there going, don't do that, stupid. You're going, yes, go get her, because they've done her such a good job of establishing that bond. It's such a good movie.
And Ripley is the first female action hero that we've put on our list, and actually was one of the just first. It's just one of the most iconic, and she delivers her own iconic one-liner.
She does, which we will leave it to the audience to. Yeah, and I'll tell you, I actually watched Aliens really recently because it popped up on Hulu. Holds up well, and she deserves that title of like female action hero. She's awesome in that movie. And Sigourney Weaver is like, she's tall. I would guess she's probably like 5'10" or so. I mean, she's tall for a female, and so she looks the part. It's just so cool, and she wears like that cool like mechanical suit thingamajiggy at the end, and that looks cool. And it's crazy to me that Cameron just came out of the gate with Terminator and Aliens. Like, what a start. Also, something Cameron does really well. This is such a silly thing to even mention, but you see it in Terminator, you see it in Aliens, you see it in Terminator 2. He always has awesome guns in his movies. Like in Terminator 2, Arnold's got like the shotgun that he flips with one hand, which is awesome. In Aliens, they've got these really cool like assault rifle things that also are grenade launchers. Kyle Reese in Terminator has the sawed-off shotgun. Yeah. So when we're talking about action, cool guns. A great component to good action.
He definitely has. I mean, obviously Cameron is just a visual genius, and he knows like what weapons are going to look cool.
Yeah.
Back to Terminator 2, the like Gatling gun that he carries, and I've seen like behind the scenes of them trying to figure out like how can we make this
so
thing
cool,
and make it work and be functional, and Arnold can hold it, and he's just got a great flair for visual. I'm realizing the further we go, the harder the picks become. Because now that I'm going, I've got one pick left, and I'm seeing all these
movies. I know.
Do I pick with my head, with my heart? Where do I go with this? And I'm going to go with my heart. There's a couple movies I'm really bummed out I'm not going to be able to pick. But this is a movie I've referenced on here before, and I think just in all sincerity, like it was such an important movie as a kid, and I still love it, and that's 1984's Red Dawn.
Yeah.
And, it's a movie about what if the Soviets and the Cubans invaded the U.S. and there was a World War III, and then these group of teenagers are surviving in the mountains, and then they just start using guerrilla warfare to fight back.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea.
It is, and it's the thing that's distinctly 80s about it is it's very like it doesn't hold punches. Even to the point where they have one of their group kind of betrays them, and they, one of them, they're like, we got to execute this guy because he betrayed us, and all of them can't do it, but one of the characters does it and executes him. And it's like, I think you could never do that today. In fact, when they remade that Red Dawn, they're like, we can't do that part. You can't have these teenagers execute one of their own.
Right.
But that was kind of the point of the 84 one, is this character was just so far gone because of all this fighting that he executed one of his best friends. And so... Man, it makes the movie sound really dark. I mean, it is kind of dark, but it's a fun, like, we've got to survive, but it just doesn't. It's only two of the characters survive in the end because the rest of them are going to die fighting.
Really good cast, too. Yeah. Like, a lot of, at the time, of people, like Swayze or some of these different people.
Charlie Sheen was in it, and it was actually, like, it's wild to see, like, young Charlie Sheen was playing kind of a tough guy, and but it actually like fit. He just seemed like just enough of a punk, but a jock, and you could see he'd be actually. I mean, he's one of the two main brothers who know how to survive in the woods because their dad like raised him on it. Was really tough on him, and he just like it fit. But yeah, it's near and dear to my heart, and I needed it on my 80s list. So.
Oh, for sure. And it goes back to what we were saying too, where like just like not a overly complicated idea, just. A good idea executed well. There was definitely a run in the 80s of movies where it was like, what if we put teenagers in this crazy, and then they just pick like a crazy scenario and then kind of thrust teenagers into it, and it worked. Yeah. I would also say probably in the long list of most unnecessary remakes, the Red Dawn remake has got to be pretty high up on the list.
I could go on and on about what was wrong with that remake.
Just a disaster from the get-go.
Yes, and one of the main things was exactly what I just said. They were way too like, this is a movie about teens fighting in the, it's got to be PG-13. It's got to be like, you can't have anything too dark in it. Which, by the way, fun fact about Red Dawn, you probably know, is it's the first PG-13 rated movie ever, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah.
So, but watching now, I'm like, it's violent. Like, there's a lot of shooting and the old like blood. Squibs, popping out and stuff. It's
the squib business would have been a great business to be in the 80s.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Am I on my last pick?
You're on your last pick.
So, okay. I'm going to do some explaining here.
All right.
What I wanted to do is kind of try to find something that I hadn't talked about yet on the podcast. Because, in my world, Rocky IV is going to be on here. But I talked quite a bit about Rocky IV on a previous pod. So I'm going to put a movie on here that I've never talked about before that I think is awesome. And I think has kind of been erased a little bit because one of the leads got canceled. I'm going to go Lethal Weapon 2.
Ooh, you're going sequel.
I'm going to go sequel. Lethal Weapon 2 is so fun. Lethal Weapon 1 is awesome. Let me just say that. Lethal Weapon 1 is awesome. In the 80s, they just came across this idea of like, okay, two cops, they love each other, but they also kind of hate each other. At this, like the love-hate relationship and the buddy cop movie and all this kind of stuff. And it was just off and running. And in Lethal Weapon, they just perfect casting in Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. They were so believable in their roles, and they were so believable as we don't get along at first, and they form this relationship. And so Lethal Weapon 1 is awesome. It was a big success. And then it was so well received. Like 2 years later, Lethal Weapon 2 comes out, and now you've established Riggs and Murtaugh, the Mel Gibson Danny, and it's just off. I mean, that movie opens with a car chase. Mel Gibson's out of his mind, and he's like screaming and yelling. He's chasing cars down the freeway, and they just jump right into it. It's so fun. It does all the 80s things. It's fun. It's violent. There's one-liners. There's all the things you want. And then they introduced the Joe Pesci character, which is one of the smartest things. He is so good. He is so funny in that movie, and he plays off of those guys perfectly. And then you've got the South African villains, which again, if you tried to actually explain the movie, like, I don't know, they're smuggling coins or something. Doesn't matter. Just really good, hateable villains. And it's just like, someone was like, all right, Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, come here. Just go do your thing, and we're going to film it. And they just have this great back and forth. It's got one of the most iconic 80s like set pieces where they put a bomb on Danny Glover's toilet, and he's on the toilet, and it probably sounds so stupid when I'm saying it, but it's fun. There's actually like some emotion between the two characters, and it was just a great 80s movie and a great sequel. But like I said, it doesn't kind of feel like it doesn't get talked about because Mel Gibson had a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think the Lethal Weapon as a series as a whole, I actually love all 4 installments.
I did too.
I think maybe one of the reasons it doesn't get talked about as much as it should is I think it suffers a little bit from the same problem that the Mission Impossible franchise suffers from, is that they're all good, but they blur together, and it becomes hard. Like, even when you said Lethal Weapon 2, I was like, I've seen them all. Which one was 2? And
you had to think
the South
for a
African
second.
villains, and I was like, okay, right, that's that one.
Yep.
The bomb on the toilet, okay, right, it's that one.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the things that it suffers from, is all 4 being good, but all 4 blend a little too much. It's probably why people but they are good. You're right. It's a great pairing.
It's a great
Mel
pairing.
Gibson maybe at his best, because
I think it is.
I think he was just made to play that character who's eccentric and kind of wild and crazy. His character is, at least from the first movie, suicidal, and so that's why he's like crazy. He doesn't mind like putting his life on the line. Right. But he's also kind of BA and
but it's got the whole but he's got a heart of gold, and it's got all those things, and it all works so well.
He is like the epitome of that. Dang it, you're a loose cannon, but you get results.
Yep, and I just love you. Yeah, it's got everything you want, and really you could have I could have had Lethal Weapon 1 on here just as easily, but I just thought 2 was more like, we've already established who these characters are. Yeah. Now we just get to let them just go.
No, it's a great pick.
Yeah.
All right, so first, I'm going to recap what we did pick. And
Okay.
We'll talk a little bit about what we didn't pick.
Yeah.
Just because I know there's several movies we want to at least give a shout out to. So, in my picks, I took Die Hard number 1, The Terminator number 2, First Blood number 3, Bloodsport 4th, and Red Dawn 5th. For yours, you took Predator number 1, Commando 2, Cobra 3. God, such a great list. Aliens 4, not the movie Aliens 4, but you took Aliens 4th on your list. And Lethal Weapon 2 was your 5th pick.
What a 10 movies we just listed off right there.
It is. And if you're wondering, like, man, how could there be any great selections left on the board? We will let you know. And first off, I just want to say this. I'm very glad that we didn't include movies from the following series, which when I Googled would be included in some of the action movie list, but I just I don't consider them like action movies. They're kind of their own thing. Bond movies, which I'm actually not a big fan of anyway.
Me neither.
So
I have no relationship to those movies at all.
There was no temptation. The Star Wars movies, I would have never classified them as action.
Me neither.
I probably wouldn't have picked one anyways, but just in case people are wondering, no Empire Strikes Back, sorry, I wouldn't have picked it anyways, but also I just don't consider it action.
Nope.
The Indiana Jones movies, which probably actually are, but there's something more like adventure-y about it. I just don't think of them as action. And then, as we said, the Rocky movies we could have included. But
I could talk about Rocky. I just kind of wanted to give everyone a break from having to listen to me talk about Rocky.
And you know what? At some point, we'll do a whole pod on just the Rocky series.
My gosh.
So
it's a fascinating series, yeah.
Yeah. But do you have I've got my list, but I want to hear from you first. What are some movies that you had that you didn't pick that you wish maybe would have?
So, yeah, definitely hurt my feelings to not be able to include these. I did put Raiders and Temple of Doom both on my list, but I ultimately kind of landed where you did, where it almost feels like those are their own. It's like almost more of an adventure than action, which, you're kind of splitting hairs, I guess. But just felt to me like those are almost in their own category. But any of those three, Raiders, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, awesome. They all hold up to me. For some real weird reason, Temple of Doom, I think, it's kind of frowned upon, I've read before. I like it a lot. I had Conan the Destroyer on my list.
I had Conan the Destroyer on my list.
Conan the Destroyer, you could almost say everything I said about Commando, you could say about Conan the Destroyer. It's ridiculous. It's so fun. It's a blast. And it's just like, hey, Conan, go on this quest. What the quest is makes no difference. And it's just Arnold. It's got one of the funniest scenes ever in a movie. I'll show you the clip sometime. Arnold, he's in a sword fight and he's swinging this sword. The sound effects are so loud and over the top, but Arnold is playing it like he is De Niro in Raging Bull, and he's getting ready to win an Oscar. It's incredible. But anyway,
I will say this: Conan the Destroyer came out in '84.
Yeah.
Commando came out in '85, and even though Commando looks like a product of the '80s. You would have guessed Conan was 20 years older than Commando by the way it was made and the quality.
Yeah.
I actually, I Googled it, and I was like, just based on the other filmography, I'm like, I feel like it might have been in 80s movies, but it just feels like it was made significantly before the 80s.
Will Chamberlain's in it for no reason
other than we need somebody else who looks giant and imposing.
I guess that was the only reason. I don't know. So that was on my list. RoboCop was on my list.
RoboCop. Yeah.
RoboCop didn't make my list because it's really not that fun. It's so gritty and violent, but it is very 80s and everything, but it didn't quite make it. Rocky 4, Lethal Weapon 1, Over the Top, the greatest arm wrestling / custody to battle movie ever made. In the illustrious history of arm wrestling divorce movies, Over the Top stands at the top of the list. I guarantee you, if you went and found kids like my kids' age, and you were like, true or false, there exists a movie in which a guy arm wrestles for custody of his child, everyone would be like, well, obviously that's false. You're just making this up. No. Also, probably worth noting that it was Stallone's follow-up to Cobra. He did Cobra and Over the Top. Maybe in back-to-back years, like 86 and then 87 possibly, which is just incredible. I wanted to throw a Steven Seagal movie on my list, and I just threw Hard to Kill. But ultimately, it didn't. None of his made my list because you could sub out any of his movies. I don't even know the difference between them.
Yeah.
It's like Hard to Kill, Above the Law, and Out for Justice. Yeah. I think we're all three 80s. Out for Justice may have been 90. But they just didn't quite. Seagal, like Schwarzenegger and Stallone are action stars. Seagal was always like kind of a B-, but
Yeah.
I do recommend you watch Hard to Kill because, like I've mentioned about some movies before, it is an unintentional comedy. It is awful. Seagal is awful. It is terrible. It's so bad, but it's so enjoyable. Roadhouse.
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 I wondered if Roadhouse would get some love on here.
It was on my list. And then I had Big Trouble in Little China, Tango and Cash, and then I had Rambo 2 on my list.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of rounded it. And I had, these are just ones I wrote down. I had some more in the back of my mind I could have thrown out there if I needed to, but that was just me going, okay, boom, 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 just coming up with a list.
Yeah. So my list included Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider, which, for whatever reason, that's like the Clint Eastwood performance to me. Like, I guess it's just whenever I saw it, my dad showed it to me.
Yeah.
That's the one I think of with Clint Eastwood. The Karate Kid, which I wasn't really sure. It's kind of like Rocky. Like
it couldn't quite make it into action for me. Really, it's almost more of like it's like kind of action, but it's like a rom-com also.
Yeah,
it's
coming
one of those
of age type movie. Yeah. So I wrote it down, but I quickly kind of moved it off the list. The Running Man, Schwarzenegger's.
I thought about it.
Like,
I thought about it. Doesn't quite hold up as well as some of the other ones to me.
It's definitely dated, but I think, again, it probably wasn't that original of a concept even at the time, but it definitely was the forerunner to several movies. I mean, even like The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's kind of what it is, really. Yeah.
Exactly. Willow, which I've talked about before.
Yeah, you've talked about that before.
My heart definitely thought about, saying pick Willow, but it just doesn't actually get there for me. And then Mad Max: The Road Warrior. The Road Warrior was, again, very influential to me as a kid because there's a couple of movies, like I said, that in my mind either like I played out 100 times with action figures or I wrote like short stories that basically ripped off. One of them, and I'm wearing the shirt today, is 1979's The
Warriors.
Obviously, not in the 80s, so I couldn't pick it today, but
it's a really cool movie.
Concept of what if you have to get across town through rival gangs as this gang and like you just kind of fight your way and
it's a crazy movie.
So that one, Bloodsport, as I said, just you got to fight your way through a tournament. The Road Warrior is what if you've got to drive a caravan from point A to point B and you're going to be under attack the whole time. You just got to protect the caravan.
Yeah.
So simple, and it's basically the same plot of the New
Mad Max.
It's very set up similar to the Road Warrior, and so it's very dated. If someone was going to watch a Mad Max movie today, you watch Fury Road.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I still remember the Road Warrior being very influential and very impactful to me.
To me, it was I more remember Thunderdome, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and that was a really cool movie. And I thought about putting it. I knew it wouldn't be in my top 5, but I did think about putting it on my list.
Yeah. So those were my ones that were close, but
I know,
but no call. So
and now if someone were to say like, come up with your 2000s best action movie list, I wouldn't have any clue. Yeah. I mean, I'd throw out like a Mad Max and stuff, but I mean, I rattled off my first like 11 movies in like 20 seconds without even, I didn't Google or anything. It was just Predator, Commando, Cobra. I mean, because there was so much to choose from.
Yeah. I think you could probably do this pretty easily again with the 90s.
Yeah.
But if we do that and then follow it up, we might have to combine just all 2000s and 2010s together or something. There's probably more than we think, but like you said, they're just not as this was the golden era.
They don't just jump out of my mind.
And I think there's a lot more genre blurring.
There are.
And it's probably what it is.
Yeah.
They don't make as many this is just action as they did in 80s and 90s.
I don't know why there isn't. Maybe it's like a box office returns type thing where they just don't get the return on the investment anymore of just a guy goes after his daughter. Daughter is, that's Taken, which was hugely successful, but these movies, there's so many of them. They are all on each other's corner, but there was room for everybody for some reason in the 80s. Stallone and Schwarzenegger are back and forth, Commando, Cobra, all this stuff, and it's all the same thing, but it just felt like there was room for everybody.
Well, I think definitely political correctness is probably responsible in large part for it, because nowadays, if you have an action hero, they have to have perfect justification or otherwise people are like, we can't get behind this. The guys, like people would look at most of the heroes we put in here and be like, they're not heroes anymore, And so the ideal just sort of has shifted so much that
and I can
it's
tell
not
you,
a fun conversation, but it's probably why.
You're probably right. And I can tell you, you go back and watch these movies, there wasn't anybody that was giving one care about political correctness.
No.
And I agree with you. Like, I know I don't want to try and all of a sudden get real weighty on here because that's not really who I am. But yeah, back in these movies, you could just, it didn't matter if they were offensive. Innocent people are getting blown away left and right in these movies. They're violent, but you're just like, awesome. This is so fun. Like, that just doesn't feel to me like it exists anymore. It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to conclude our draft. We'll definitely have to do more drafts. I don't know
Drafts
if we'll
are
come
fun.
back with just, exactly the same setup, but I enjoyed that immensely.
Oh my gosh.
I'm still bummed out I didn't get Predator, but that's okay. It was a great pick by you. And I'll post these online, and people can tell us what movies they would have drafted if they had the chance. And
if you miss this era, just check one of these movies out, because I can explain Cobra until I'm blue in the face, until you watch it and you just see the complete absurdity just on screen. You really can't understand. It has to be seen to be believed, kind of.
It's so true. And I don't think any of these movies are terribly long. Like, that's another thing. They used to just be a pretty...
Just zip right through. Especially some of the lesser, like your Commandos and Cobras. I mean, those have got to be an hour and a half or less. Yeah. No time is wasted. There is no... I know you were trying to wrap up, but I'm going to...
No, it's fine.
I'm like Commando. Zero character development. No character arcs. Like, it's not like like Matrix is his name. He starts here, but he learns and he grows. No. There's no character development. Nobody learns any lessons. You took my kid. I told you I was going to kill you. I did. We go home. That is the movie. No extra scenes. Nothing. They just wasted no time back then. They knew what they were making, and they knew who they were making those movies for. And if you wanted to go see them, you knew what you were getting. If you didn't, you stayed away. It was a great time.
Oh, I think it's a lot like this podcast. You guys know what you're getting, and hopefully you're here for it.
I hope so.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
So much fun.
And we'll see you next time.
All right.